Hi, my name is Mary Elizabeth Castle, and I'm Director of Government Relations for Texas Values. Texas Values is the largest law and policy organization in the state of Texas that works on religious liberty, pro-life, and marriage and family issues. If you have been following our work for some time, then you're aware of our efforts on the privacy issue, the gender identity issue being mentioned in schools, and our 3-year effort to keep men out of women's sports. But did you know the Biden administration is trying to derail those efforts? Ever since President Joe Biden has been in office, there has been an effort to inject gender identity into our school policy. Recently, with the U.S. Department of Education, his administration has made attempts to redefine sex in Title IX. How, you might ask? How do you redefine sex in law? Well, instead of sex just meaning male and female in the century-old law, it would also include gender identity. This confusing policy could be proposed rule as soon as May. This could have devastating effects on men and women's sports and men and women's private spaces. This is why Texas Values is bringing you this 5-part series on what to know about Title IX so you can be educated, motivated, and activated. The first thing you need to know is that this rewrite of Title IX rewrites law and reality. Title IX was passed over 50 years ago in 1972. Let's take a step back and realize why we have Title IX in the first place. A woman named Patsy Mink, who is a congresswoman, wrote this law in order to make sure that there were great opportunities in education and sports for women. Her story is that when she first applied to law school, she was denied because she was a woman. Then, when she got to law school, she was denied the opportunity to sit for the bar because she was married. And then once she applied for a law firm, she was later denied that opportunity as well because she was married and had a child. Patsy Mink thought it was very important that women would have opportunities in education and athletics, and that's why we have Title IX. Title IX was created to make sure we have a clear definition of sex, of male and female, to ensure that women can have equal opportunities in education and sports. But not only does this rewrite law that's been in place for over 50 years to make sure that women can have both athletic opportunities unique to them and have their privacy in bathrooms and locker rooms, we're also rewriting reality. From the time of the beginning, we have known that sex has been male and female. Male and female is not something that's a concept or that was just merely created in 1972 when we had Title IX. Male and female is biological reality that is determined by chromosomes, your reproductive activity, and your body makeup. Male and female also, as we understand as Christians, is something that was created in the very beginning by God. With that being said, it's very important that we have this defined clearly in law and don't allow it to be interpreted some other way. The Biden administration's rewrite would actually rewrite this reality for us by including gender identity. In including gender identity, which there are now over 100 gender identities, it would cause great confusion. This could mean men and women's sports, men and women's locker rooms and private spaces. This could also mean problems in the classroom with forcing teachers and students to use preferred pronouns. We must stop this rewrite of Title IX because of the confusion it causes and make sure we're not rewriting 50 years of law, but also an eternity of reality. This is number 2 in the 5 things you need to know about Title IX. The rewrite of Title IX by the U.S. Department of Education ignores legislative intent and overrides its authority as an agency. Every law that is passed in U.S. Congress or even the state legislature has what is called legislative intent. Simply put, that's the original purpose and reason for having a law. Why is legislative intent important? Because it is useful in interpreting laws, and it is useful in knowing the power of what an agency can actually do. The U.S. Department of Education is simply an agency, and what they are doing is rewriting law. It's very clear that the legislative intent of Title IX was not for men to compete in women's sports or steal their sports opportunities. It's also very clear that the legislative intent of Title IX was to have male and female be the definition of sex. With the rewrite of Title IX to include gender identity, the Department of Education is actually abusing their authority as an agency and overstepping what should actually be done by Congress. This should not be done. If the U.S. Department continues with this effort to rewrite the definition of sex, then only lawsuits are to come. The U.S. Department of Education should slow down their attempts because they can only propose rules. Instead, if Congress actually wanted to redefine sex, they would do this in law, and yet they haven't done it. This is the second thing you need to know about the rewrite of Title IX. Here is the third thing you need to know and the 5 things to know about the changes in Title IX. The number 3 thing that you need to know that is very important is that the Title IX changes by the Biden administration that could go into effect this spring would have a devastating effect on women's sports. We know that the origin of Title IX is to make sure that women have equal opportunities as men in athletic opportunities. And the Biden administration pretends that this is not the intent of the rewrite, but several statements from the White House and even the U.S. Department of Education prove otherwise. Even the U.S. Department of Education has now said under this pretense that they'll have to reconsider if their rewrite of Title IX will actually affect if men can play in women's sports. And what was their response when we sent a letter with 28 other groups asking if the Title IX changes would affect women's sports? Their response was coming up with a 2-part test. It's a 2-part test that places the burden on all female athletes to prove that they have a right to compete and win in sports. They are issuing another public comment period and proposing this 2-part test. And each woman, every time that a male competes in her sport or steals her spot on the team, she'll have to prove these 2 things. The first thing is, would it be substantially related to the achievement of an important educational objective? And number 2, would allowing her to have a right to play sports minimize harms to students whose opportunity to participate on a male or female team consistent with their gender identity would be limited or denied? You get that? The second part of the test grants favor on the male competing in female sports. This test obviously favors men participating in women's sports. When Title IX was first debated in 1972, male legislators attempted to remove women's opportunity in sports completely from the bill language, and one of those lawmakers was actually from Texas. Hopefully Texas never makes the mistake again of not standing up for women's sports. But that's exactly why Texas needs to step up and make sure we have full protection for women's sports, even in college athletics. Last session, we were very successful in making sure we passed a bill by Representative Valerie Swanson that protects college girls in K-12 sports, but the work is not done. This session, we have a great opportunity to make sure we protect college athletes like Riley Gaines, Macy Petty, and others who have experienced losing out on opportunities to male athletes. The time is right for us to stand up for women's sports in college. And not only does the rewrite steal opportunities for victory, trophies, scholarships, name and likeness, but the Title IX rewrite also threatens safety. Recently, a volleyball player who had to play against a male athlete was hit in the face and faced a concussion. And if you heard the stories of Riley Gaines and others, these Title IX changes would actually allow males to dress and undress in private spaces with other female athletes. If we don't address these issues with the U.S. Department of Education now, these changes could have devastating effects on our women and girls. It's time to make sure that we pass a law in Texas to make sure that these women and girls are protected, and also to make sure that the Biden administration and our federal government know how important it is to protect women's sports and to protect women's private spaces. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll bring you more parts of how Title IX changes affect your rights and the rights of our children. Here is the fourth thing you need to know about the new Title IX changes. Number 4, the Title IX changes would force gender identity politics in our schools. Now, Title IX, at its basis, is an anti-discrimination policy, which is a good thing. But if you're going to add gender identity to the definition of sex, then that means several policies that prioritize gender identity over other civil rights, such as religious liberty and the right to female private spaces. We've already seen how this works in our Texas schools with some of the policies with the Texas Association of School Boards, where they add non-discrimination policies based on gender identity. This could create a plethora of problems for our kids in schools, including having students use preferred pronouns, having teachers use preferred pronouns, having people choose the restroom and locker room of their choice. Also, it would be devastating to women's sports, like we said, and it would create a lot of confusion on religious liberty rights, where students cannot talk about their religious beliefs on marriage and sexuality. A lot of people also don't realize that it could also create problems for our pro-life issues as well. The new Title IX changes not just add gender identity to the definition of sex, but they also add abortion to the definition of pregnancy. Now, while schools might not be forced to fund abortions, they will be allowed to fund abortions. And a lot of schools under the new definition of Title IX would give access to information on how to obtain an abortion and education on abortion. And this could have devastating effects of how we teach life in public schools. A lot of people don't realize that these changes on Title IX have such resounding effects on our kids in school. That's why it's so important that you speak out as a parent, as a teacher, as a policymaker, and even as a citizen to make sure that we don't have these gender identity politics in our schools with the Title IX changes. Thanks for tuning in to number 4 on the issues with the new Title IX changes. We'll be coming out with the 5th thing on what to watch out for the Title IX changes soon. Thank you. This is the number 5 thing that you need to know in the rewrite of Title IX by the U.S. Department of Education. The 5th thing that you need to know is a very positive thing. The 5th fact is that so many parents, policymakers, educators, and citizens have been speaking out against the rewrite of Title IX in the U.S. Department of Education. Actually, so many people spoke out against the rewrite that the U.S. Department of Education could not implement these changes in January as planned. However, you still need to be aware because these changes can go into effect this month in May that would redefine sex to include gender identity. In fact, many groups have been speaking out. Texas Values joined a group of 28 other organizations to make sure that this new rule proposal would not impact women's sports. And the response was that they would have a new rule proposal where we would have more comments on this effect on women's sports, and that would go separate from the addition of gender identity to the definition of sex. Please be aware of this deadline as this will affect how you can respond to the changes in Title IX. That rule proposal will be due May 15th. Since so many people are speaking out, you have a chance to get involved too. Here are some steps you can take to make sure that you speak out against these new Title IX changes. Number 1, contact your state legislator about passing a law to protect women's sports. We already have a bill in our Texas legislature that can do this, so make sure that it gets passed this session. Number 2, visit SaveWomenSportsTexas.com and sign the petition. Number 3, watch out for gender identity policies in your child's school. As we discussed in early videos, that could mean pronoun usage, dress codes, and even abortion being in the definition of pregnancy. Number 4, tell your lawmakers to avoid passing any laws that grant special privileges based on gender identity. And number 5, be on the lookout for submitting a comment to the Federal Register to oppose the Biden administration's new rule for men participating in women's sports. You can submit this comment up until next Monday on May 15th. Thank you so much for tuning in to our series on the 5 things you need to know about Title IX. We hope that this keeps you engaged and educated and that we can stop this radical policy agenda.